The soft melodies of a piano filled the grand hall, mingling with the clink of crystal glasses and bursts of laughter. The evening party in Ethan Carter's luxurious mansion was a dazzling showcase of wealth and power. Every detail, from the sparkling chandeliers to the polished marble floors, exuded perfection, the kind of perfection only money could create. Ethan, dressed impeccably in a custom-made suit, leaned against the balcony railing, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room with a hint of boredom. At 35, he was a self-made millionaire, confident to the point of arrogance. To him, money wasn't just a tool, it was proof of his superiority, his ability to shape the world to his will. "You're getting bored, aren't you?" came a familiar voice from behind. It was Ryan, his longtime friend and partner in crime for many reckless adventures. Ryan, with a mischievous glint in his eye and a glass of wine in hand, approached Ethan with a smirk that promised trouble. "Bored?" Ethan smirked back. "I enjoy watching people try to impress me." Ryan chuckled. "Ah, classic Ethan, always convinced you're above it all." "Because I am," Ethan replied, his tone cool and unwavering. Ryan took a sip of his wine, his eyes wandering to the large window that overlooked the streets below. "You think money can do anything, don't you?" he said casually. "Because it can," Ethan said with ease, glancing at Ryan. "And I've proven it time and time again." Ryan's smirk widened. "Let's put that theory to the test." Ethan turned, a hint of curiosity flickering across his face. "What are you getting at?" Ryan gestured toward the window. Outside, under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a lone figure sat hunched on the curb. It was a woman wrapped in a threadbare blanket, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling slightly in the cold. Her hair hung in matted strands, obscuring her face. "That woman," Ryan said, pointing. "I bet you can't turn her into a lady fit to walk into this very ballroom." Ethan's eyebrows furrowed, his gaze fixed on the figure below. "You're joking." "I'm completely serious," Ryan replied, leaning casually against the window frame. 3 months. Bring her into your world. Transform her into someone who can command the room. And I'll bet you $5 million you can't do it. The room grew quieter as other guests turned their attention to the two men. Ethan's piercing gaze lingered on the woman for a moment. From the shadows, she seemed like a ghost of a person, forgotten and invisible. But even in the dim light, there was something about her posture, a quiet resilience that caught him off guard. Ethan turned back to Ryan, his lips curling into a confident smile. 3 months? Done. Prepare to lose your money. Ryan laughed, raising his glass. "This is going to be entertaining." Without hesitation, Ethan set his glass down and strode toward the grand staircase. His steps echoed in the cold night air as he approached the woman. She didn't move, though she sensed someone standing in front of her. Slowly, she looked up, her tired eyes meeting his. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but direct. "Claire," she replied hesitantly, her voice raspy from disuse. Ethan extended his hand, his expression unreadable. "Claire, do you want to change your life?" Claire stared at Ethan's outstretched hand, her fingers clutching the edge of her thin, tattered blanket. She didn't know whether to laugh or be insulted. A man in an expensive suit, polished shoes, and an air of superiority stood in front of her, asking if she wanted to change her life, as if her entire existence was just a game to him. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Ethan's eyebrow arched slightly. "No catch. I'll give you a place to stay, food, clothing, and everything else you'll need. All I ask is that you cooperate with what I say. It's a simple arrangement." Claire let out a small, hollow laugh. "People like you don't help people like me for free. So, I'll ask again. What's the catch?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his confidence wavering under the sharpness of her gaze. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially by someone in her position. Still, he decided honesty, or at least partial honesty, was the best route. Let's just say it's an experiment. Ethan admitted. I want to prove that anyone, no matter their circumstances, can change with the right resources. Claire tilted her head, her tired eyes narrowing. An experiment? So, what am I? Your lab rat. Ethan exhaled sharply, already regretting his choice of words. Think of it however you like, but you'll have food, a warm bed, and a chance to start over. The offer sounded too good to be true, and Claire knew better than to trust men in expensive suits with promises that seemed to come from nowhere. But the cold pavement beneath her was unforgiving, and the empty ache in her stomach was even crueler. This might be her only chance to get off the streets, even if it came with strings attached. After a long pause, she finally said, Fine, but don't expect me to be grateful. Ethan didn't react to her tone. He simply nodded and gestured toward the sleek black car parked nearby. Good. Get in. Claire rose slowly, clutching her blanket around her shoulders as she shuffled toward the car. Ethan opened the door for her, but she hesitated on the threshold. You're not going to kill me or anything, are you? She asked, half joking, half serious. Ethan smirked faintly. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have come down here in person. Claire rolled her eyes but slid into the car, her thin frame sinking into the plush leather seat. It was the softest thing she'd sat on in years, but instead of comfort, it made her feel small and out of place. Ethan climbed in after her, sitting at a calculated distance. The driver, an older man in his 40s, barely acknowledged Claire as he started the engine. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the flickering street lamp and the cold pavement where Claire had spent countless nights. The drive to Ethan's mansion was silent. Claire stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together, while Ethan busied himself on his phone, ignoring her entirely. She couldn't decide if that made her feel relieved or irritated. When they finally arrived at the estate, Claire's breath caught. The mansion was massive, with towering columns and sprawling gardens illuminated by warm golden lights. It looked like something out of a movie, a world so far removed from hers that she felt like she was dreaming. Ethan stepped out of the car first, adjusting his cufflinks as he turned to her. Come on, he said curtly. Claire followed reluctantly, her worn sneakers scuffing against the pristine marble steps as they ascended to the grand entrance. Inside, the opulence was almost overwhelming. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, polished floors reflected the light, and every piece of furniture looked like it had been chosen with meticulous care. This way, Ethan said, leading her down a long hallway. He stopped in front of a door and pushed it open, revealing a modest but elegant guest bedroom. It was nothing compared to the rest of the mansion, but to Claire, felt like a palace. The bed was large and inviting, with crisp white linens that looked untouched. A small table in the corner held a vase of fresh flowers, their fragrance faint but pleasant. You'll stay here, Ethan said. Meals will be brought to you. If you need anything, ask the staff. But don't bother me unless it's important. Claire glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Got it. Ethan lingered for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But then he turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Claire alone in the silence. She stood there for a moment, taking in her surroundings. The bed looked so soft, so clean, that she was almost afraid to touch it. Slowly, she sank onto the edge of the mattress, her hands resting on her lap as she stared down at the floor. For the first time in a long time, she was warm, she was safe, but the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. Whatever she had gotten herself into, she knew one thing: it wasn't going to be easy. Downstairs, Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out the window of his study. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The bet had seemed like a harmless game at first, a chance to prove his point and humiliate Ryan in the process. But now that Claire was here, something about her unsettled him. She wasn't like the people he surrounded himself with, polished, eager to please, and predictable. She was raw, defiant, and painfully real. Ethan swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his jaw tightening. This was just a challenge. He reminded himself. A game. Nothing more. But as he stood there, watching his own reflection in the glass, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something in motion that he might not be able to control. Claire awoke to a soft knock on the door. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. The warmth of the bed and the faint scent of fresh linens made her feel as though she were in a dream. Then reality sank in. She was in Ethan's mansion, part of some grand experiment she still didn't fully understand. The knock came again, firmer this time. "Breakfast is ready, ma'am." A young woman's voice called through the door. Claire hesitated before replying. "I'll be down in a minute." Dragging herself out of bed, she glanced at the reflection in the ornate mirror above the dresser. Her tangled hair framed a gaunt, pale face, and her eyes, though sharper than they'd been in years, still carried shadows of exhaustion. She pulled her tattered sweater tighter around her, bracing herself for whatever awaited her downstairs. The dining room was cavernous, its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers. A long mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, set with an extravagant spread of food: freshly baked bread, golden eggs, vibrant fruits, and an array of pastries. It was enough to feed a small army. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, casually scrolling through his phone. He barely glanced up as Claire entered, her footsteps hesitant against the polished floor. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him without looking at her. Claire obeyed, her eyes darting around the room. The sheer scale of everything, the size of the table, the height of the ceilings, the silence that seemed to swallow her whole, was suffocating. Ethan finally set his phone down and met her gaze. "You'll need to eat properly. Starting today, you're on a strict diet and regimen. We're not just cleaning you up, we're rebuilding you." Claire raised an eyebrow, her hand hovering over a piece of bread. "Rebuilding me?" Ethan's expression didn't waver. "You're going to learn how to walk, talk, and act like someone who belongs in this world. I've hired trainers, stylists, nutritionists, and a speech coach. They'll take care of everything." Claire let out a humorless laugh. "And what happens if I don't cooperate?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Then you go back to the street. It's your choice." His words were like a slap to the face. But Claire didn't flinch. She picked up the bread, tearing off a small piece and chewing it slowly. "Fine," she said finally. "But don't expect me to become one of you." Ethan smirked, his confidence unwavering. "We'll see." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan's team descended upon Claire like a well-oiled machine, each member tasked with reshaping a part of her life. First came the nutritionist, who assessed her malnourished state and created a strict meal plan designed to restore her health. The food was bland but nourishing, and Claire ate it without complaint, determined not to give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. Then there was the dermatologist, a sharp-eyed woman who examined Claire's weathered skin with clinical precision. "Years of sun damage and malnutrition," she muttered, outlining a regimen of creams, treatments, and vitamins to repair the damage. The fitness trainer was perhaps the toughest of them all. "You've spent too long surviving," she said bluntly. "Now it's time to start living." Claire was put through grueling exercises that left her muscles aching and her breath short. But she refused to quit. Every bead of sweat felt like a step away from the streets and toward something she couldn't quite name. But the hardest part was the etiquette training. A woman named Celeste, Ethan's personal assistant, was tasked with teaching Claire how to walk, speak, and behave like someone who belonged in high society. Celeste was meticulous and unrelenting, correcting Claire's posture, refining her speech, and drilling her on the nuances of social interaction. Claire despised it at first. The rules felt arbitrary, the lessons suffocating. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to see the results. Her movements became more fluid, her speech more polished, The reflection in the mirror was no longer that of a weary, homeless woman, but someone entirely new. Ethan observed Claire's progress from a distance. At first, he treated it as nothing more than a project, a game he was determined to win. But as the weeks passed, he found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her appearance. Though the transformation was remarkable, it was the quiet strength she carried, the way she faced every challenge without complaint, and the sharp wit that often caught him off guard. One evening, he found himself standing outside the library, watching as Claire flipped through a book. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, highlighting the changes that had taken place over the past month. She looked serene, confident, and completely unaware of his presence. For the first time, Ethan wondered if he had underestimated her, not just as a person, but as someone who might challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. The night of Claire's first formal outing arrived, a charity gala hosted in Ethan's own mansion, dressed in an emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly. She descended the grand staircase with the grace of someone born into wealth. The room fell silent as heads turned, guests murmuring in awe at the woman who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Ethan, standing at the base of the stairs, felt a strange mix of pride and unease. She was perfect, exactly what he had envisioned when he accepted Ryan's bet. But as Claire approached him, her chin held high and her eyes steady, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer playing his game. Later that evening, in the privacy of the library, Claire confronted Ethan. "Tell me the truth," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Why did you do all of this?" Ethan hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. "It started as a bet," he admitted. "But now, it's more than that." Claire's eyes narrowed. "More than that? What does that even mean?" Ethan stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. "It means you've changed me, Claire, and I don't know what to do with that." Claire stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she saw vulnerability in Ethan's eyes, a crack in the armor he had so carefully constructed. It terrified her, but it also made her wonder if there was more to him than she had ever believed. Claire could feel the weight of Ethan's words lingering in the air, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to confront. Instead of responding, she turned and walked out of the library, leaving Ethan standing in the glow of the fireplace, his expression unreadable. The next morning, Claire tried to push the conversation out of her mind, focusing instead on preparing for yet another event, a private dinner with Ethan's closest associates. She didn't know much about the guest list, but she had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to enjoy the company. As the evening arrived, Claire descended the staircase, her emerald gown replaced by a sleek black dress Celeste had chosen for her. She looked poised, every inch the lady Ethan's team had molded her to be. But as she stepped into the dining room, she froze. At the table, chatting animatedly with Ethan, was Ryan, the man who had started this entire ordeal. Ryan's sharp eyes caught her hesitation, and his face lit up with a smug smile. "Ah, there she is, the star of the show." Claire clenched her jaw and walked forward, determined not to let him see her discomfort. Ethan stood, his face tight as he gestured toward her. "Ryan, this is Claire." Ryan didn't bother to hide his amusement as he gave her a once-over. "Claire, you're even more remarkable than I imagined. Truly, Ethan has outdone himself." Claire's lips tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I didn't realize I was part of a performance." Ryan chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Oh, don't be modest. You've proven quite the point, haven't you, Ethan? Money can fix anything, even the impossible." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Ryan." But Ryan ignored him, leaning forward in his chair as he addressed Claire. "Tell me, Claire, how does it feel to be the subject of such an extraordinary experiment? To go from the street to the spotlight in just a few months?" Claire's heart pounded as his words hit her like a slap. She turned to Ethan, her eyes narrowing. "What is he talking about?" Ethan hesitated, his usual composure slipping as guilt flickered across his face. "Claire, I can explain." "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "I want the truth." "What is he talking about?" "Ethan?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the tension. "Oh, he didn't tell you? This all started as a bet. Ethan here thought he could turn you into a proper lady. And I must say, he's succeeded beyond my expectations." The room fell silent. Claire's hands curled into fists at her sides, her breath shallow as she stared at Ethan. "Is that true?" she demanded. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "It started that way," he admitted. "But it's not like that anymore, Claire." "I don't," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "Don't stand there and act like this is something noble. You used me. You treated me like some project. A game." "It wasn't a game to me," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Not anymore. You've changed me, Claire." She shook her head, backing away. "I don't care how you feel, Ethan. You lied to me. You humiliated me." Her voice cracked, but she refused to let herself cry. All of this, everything, was just about proving a point. Ryan, still seated, raised his glass in mock celebration. "Well, this dinner turned out to be far more entertaining than I expected." Claire turned on her heel, storming out of the dining room and up the stairs. Ethan made a move to follow her, but Ryan grabbed his arm. "Let her go," he said, his tone laced with mock concern. "She'll get over it." Ethan yanked his arm free, glaring at Ryan. "You don't understand," he said through gritted teeth. "This isn't about the bet anymore." Ryan smirked. "Oh, please, don't tell me you've actually fallen for her." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he strode out of the room, ignoring Ryan's laughter that echoed behind him. Claire packed her few belongings in silence, her hands trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. She had known there was a catch to Ethan's offer, but she hadn't expected this to be the subject of a bet. Her life reduced to nothing more than a joke between two rich men. Ethan found her just as she zipped up the small bag. "Claire, wait," he said, blocking the doorway. "Get out of my way," she said coldly. "Please, just let me explain," he pleaded. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it's not what you think anymore. This started as a bet. Yes, but I swear, Claire, you've changed me. You're not a project to me. You're..." "Enough," she snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to make this about you. You think just because you've decided to feel something, that erases what you did? That it makes any of this okay?" Ethan's shoulders sagged, his usual confidence replaced by a desperate vulnerability. "I don't know how to make it right," he admitted, "but I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do." Claire stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up her bag and walked past him, her voice quiet but firm. "You can start by letting me go." Ethan didn't try to stop her. Over the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into his work, but nothing could fill the void Claire had left. He spent hours in his study, replaying their last conversation over and over in his mind, wondering how he could ever make amends. Claire, meanwhile, had found a small apartment and a job at a local shelter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her own life. Still, she couldn't entirely shake Ethan from her thoughts. The way he had looked at her, the regret in his voice. She hated that part of her wanted to believe him. One day, while volunteering at the shelter, she received a surprise visitor. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding a folder and looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," he said, his voice hesitant. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about how I need to prove that I've changed. So I started this." He handed her the folder. Inside were plans for a new initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping the homeless and marginalized. "I want to do something real," he said, "something that matters." and I want you to be a part of it, if you're willing." Claire looked at him, her heart conflicted. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but as she glanced at the plans in her hands, she saw a glimpse of the man he could become, the man she wanted to believe he could be. Claire stared at the folder in her hands, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The plans Ethan had laid out were ambitious, providing shelter, medical aid, and job training for the homeless, all funded by his wealth. It was a far cry from the man who had once treated her like a project. She looked up at him, her voice guarded. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again. "Because I want to make things right. Because I've seen what this world does to people, and I can't ignore it anymore. And because you made me realize that I've been living my life all wrong." Claire folded her arms, her voice sharp. "You think a foundation will make up for what you did to me?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "I don't expect it to. This isn't about redemption. It's about doing something meaningful. Something I should have been doing all along." Claire studied him carefully, searching his face for any trace of insincerity. To her surprise, all she saw was vulnerability and regret. She wanted to walk away, to slam the door and never look back. But something stopped her. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "I'll help you, but on one condition." "Anything," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't get to lead this," she said firmly. "You're funding it, but I'm running it. No grand speeches, no photo ops, no using this to boost your reputation. If you want to prove you've changed, you'll do it quietly." Ethan nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Deal." Over the next several months, Claire and Ethan worked side by side to launch the Hope Bridge Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping the homeless and marginalized. Claire took charge of the day-to-day operations, while Ethan stayed in the background, providing funding and logistical support. At first, their interactions were strained. Claire kept her guard up, unwilling to let Ethan back into her life emotionally. Ethan, for his part, respected her boundaries, determined to let his actions speak louder than words. The first major milestone came with the opening of a new shelter in the heart of the city. It was a far cry from the cold, overcrowded shelters Claire had once relied on. This one was warm, welcoming, and filled with resources to help people rebuild their lives. During the opening ceremony, Claire gave a speech that left the room silent. "This isn't just a shelter," she said, her voice steady. "It's a reminder that everyone deserves dignity and a second chance. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like the world has given up on you. But this place exists to prove that no one is beyond hope." Ethan watched her from the back of the room, his chest tight with pride and something else he couldn't quite name. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and he knew he had played only a small part in that transformation. As the months went by, the tension between Claire and Ethan began to thaw. She saw the quiet ways he contributed to the foundation, visiting shelters unannounced, speaking with staff, and even volunteering during food drives. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he genuinely cared. One evening, after a particularly long day at the shelter, Claire found Ethan in the office, poring over budget reports. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him for a moment before speaking. "You know," she said, her tone lighter than usual, "you're not half bad at this." Ethan looked up, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'll take that as a compliment." Claire stepped inside, sitting across from him. "I've been meaning to say, I can see you're trying, and I appreciate it." Ethan met her gaze, his expression earnest. "I'm not just trying, Claire. I'm changing. Because of you." Claire's chest tightened at his words, but she didn't look away. For the first time, she allowed herself to see the man he had become, not the arrogant millionaire, but someone who was learning to care about more than himself. Their progress was tested when Ryan resurfaced, this time at a gala celebrating the success of the Hope Bridge Initiative. He cornered Ethan near the bar, his usual smug demeanor intact. "So," Ryan drawled, "you've turned charity work into a love story. How quaint." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Ryan?" Ryan smirked. "I just find it fascinating how easily people can forget. Claire may be wearing designer dresses now, but let's not pretend she belongs in your world. You can dress her up, but she's still—" "Enough," Ethan snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "Claire belongs wherever she chooses to be, and frankly, she's better than any of us." Ryan chuckled, unfazed. "Defensive, are we? Well, good luck with your little experiment. Let's see how long it lasts." Ethan walked away without another word, his fists clenched at his sides. When he found Claire later that evening, she immediately noticed the tension in his posture. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Ryan," Ethan muttered. "He's trying to stir up trouble." Claire sighed, shaking her head. "Let him. He's nothing to me." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "You're everything to me." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you mean that?" Ethan nodded, his eyes unwavering. "Every word." Weeks later, as they stood on the balcony of the first shelter they had opened together, Ethan turned to Claire with a nervous energy she hadn't seen in him before. "I've been thinking," he began, reaching into his pocket, "about how this all started, and how far we've come." Claire tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "And?" Ethan pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "I don't deserve you, Claire, but I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'll never take you for granted again." Claire's breath caught, her heart pounding as she looked from the ring to Ethan's face. "Ethan, I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I'm asking for a chance to build something real with you." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded, her voice trembling but steady. "Yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly. When he looked up at her, she was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile that made every struggle worth it. Their wedding was small and intimate, attended by friends, foundation staff, and some of the people whose lives they had changed. It wasn't about grand gestures or appearances. It was about love, trust, and the shared commitment to a better future. Together, they continued to grow the Hope Bridge initiative, helping thousands of people rebuild their lives. But more than that, they built a life together, one rooted in respect, partnership, and an unshakable belief in second chances. As they stood on the balcony of their home one evening, watching the sunset, Claire leaned into Ethan's side, her voice soft. "We've come a long way." Ethan kissed her forehead, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. "And we're just getting started."